What was the Industrial Revolution? The Industrial Revolution was a period of time in England when there was an increase in the output of goods made by machines through inventions. The beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There were several main factors that led to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, one of which was improvements in farming, which began in the early 1700s. These improvements allowed for more food and less hungry and more nutritionally healthy people. However, there were also challenges with these new improvements. Soon, the enclosure movement began. Under this act, wealthy landowners bought out the land owned by small village farmers. Thus, they pushed small farmers off their land, leaving them without work. However, this led to them forming a labor force for industry. One of the greatest improvements in farming was scientific farming, which was brought on by the Scientific Revolution and the Enlightenment period. Jethro Tull was one of the first scientific farmers. Instead of sowing seed, which wasted seed, he invented the seed drill in 1721. The drill sowed seeds in well-spaced rows at specific depths. The concept of crop rotation was also invented by Charles Townshend. The crops grown on each parcel of land were rotated each season in order to maximize the use of the land. Lastly, Robert Bakewell improved livestock through the use of selective breeding. The second factor to the start of the Industrial Revolution was the rising population. An increase in food supplies, medical advancements, and better living conditions resulted in an increase in population and longer longevity. For example, in 1796, the smallpox vaccine was created. People also began to marry at a younger age and then have kids, which shortened the generation gap. In result, more people equaled an increase in demands, which equaled a need for industries. Lastly, the Industrial Revolution was dependent on three natural resources: water power and coal, which were used as energy for new machines, and iron ore, which was used for machines, tools, and buildings. Throughout the Industrial Revolution, Great Britain had the biggest advantage over the other European countries. Great Britain was rich in all three of these natural resources. Its geography also helped. It was an island nation and had fine harbors, which harbored more than 6,000 merchant trade ships. They also had advanced banking systems. The concept of loans allowed for investment in better machines and building new factories. There had also yet to be any wars or fighting on British land. New inventions. New inventions began to immerse into the population, resulting in a growing industry. One of these inventions was cloth. The old way. Cloth was woven by hand using wheels and looms. The problem? Weavers couldn't keep up with the demand for cloth, particularly cotton. The new way. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle. Then, in 1764, James Hargreaves created the spinning jenny. Lastly, in 1779, the spinning mule was created, which was a spinning jenny powered by the water frame. The advancement caused? Spinning mules were too big and expensive for homes, so merchants set up several in factories. This resulted in 1785 Edmund Cartwright inventing the power loom, which was run by water power and new machines. In addition, in 1793, Eli Whitney created the cotton gin, which made it possible for slaves to pick and clean 10 times as much cotton daily as they did before. The next invention, the steam engine. The old way, water power was used to power factories. The problem? All the factories had to be built near rushing water. The new way. In the 1770s, James Watt partnered with Matthew Boulton to build steam engines which could be used to power factories in any location. The advancement. Factories now had a source of power 24/7. The third invention, railroad systems. Railroads allowed for easy transportation and encouraged further industrial growth. This was because of manufacturers had a fast, cheap way to transport materials and finished products. New jobs were created because they needed people to lay out track and operate the coal used to run the railroad cars. It allowed for progress in agriculture. For now, farmers could send milk and fruit to distant cities for trade and market, as well as selling fish daily in far cities. Also, the attitude on travel improved. Country people began taking jobs in the city, and people began traveling for enjoyment. Improvements in farming, longer longevity, and new inventions led to more people residing in cities, causing a swift population increase. Factories began to expand and required numerous workers and long, harsh hours in order to meet demands. Small hands were needed for operating sewing machines, and smaller bodies in the coal mines allowed for deeper mining. This resulted in the exploiting of child labor. Children who worked in the mines were often called trappers and were employed to keep the ventilation shafts in the mines clear. However, orphan children faced the worst working conditions. Many factories employed orphans in return for room and board. Unfortunately, the children were rarely fed and worked 12 to 14 hours a day, sleeping on straw beds during the break. In 1831, the British Parliament began to investigate the poor conditions children were forced to work in. Determining that the conditions were detrimental to the children's health, they issued the Factory Act of 1833. Under this act, children had to be 9 years of age or older to work. Ages 9 to 13 could work up to 8 hours a day, and children 14 to 18 years of age were not allowed to work more than 12 hours. This law was similar to the regulation passed in 1842, known as the Mines Act. As working conditions improved, wealth began to spread and factory owners, shippers, and merchants began to form an emerging middle class. This new middle class was wealthy, and many bought large estates. Tension began to rise between this new middle class and the upper crust of society. This policy, known as laissez-faire, had been put forth in the late 1700s by Adam Smith during the Enlightenment Age. This policy stated that only men who owned a large amount of property could vote, nor working men or women were granted the right to vote. Workers became violent as they protested, determined for reform. Workers began to gather in groups called unions. The union spoke on behalf of all the workers in a particular trade. The purpose of unions was to bargain for better working conditions and higher pay. If these requests were denied, union members would strike. For many years, the government refused to reform and grant unions their requests. Unions and protests led to the new ideology known as socialism. Socialism suggested that society as a whole should control daily functions and that the government should oversee the initial progression. Then the government would leave and allow the people to govern themselves. This was a contrast to the laissez-faire capitalism. Unions may not have been successful in Britain at first. However, the concept of unions did not fade away. The United States of America is a prime example of the use of unions and their importance to government and the workforce. From the 1920s, when women were granted the right to vote, to present day, America has had a multitude of unions. Being a democratic country, America has taken a socialist approach to governing the country. In doing so, laws have been set forth strictly prohibiting child labor, ensuring workmen's compensation, and granting women equal rights to men. Government has intervened in these areas in order to issue regulations that work to keep citizens safer. The United States government has also promoted progressive and socialist ideologies through establishing welfare programs such as food stamps and the Women, Infant, and Children's Program. In addition, the Federal Social Security Program requires that a portion of workers' salaries go into a federally managed retirement fund. From revolutionary advancements in farming and new inventions to the formation of unions, the ideologies of socialism and progressivism surfaced from the monumental Industrial Revolution. This crucial time in global history has directly impacted our everyday lives in modern-day America. It can be argued that the Industrial Revolution is one of the pivotal time periods in our world's history to date.